Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dustin Kircher with MHP Nation. I got my partner here, Ben Dreiser. Thanks for joining us on our show today. This one's going to be an amazing show. It's a little bit different than what we've been doing. Normally, we've been interviewing people that are in the mobile home park space and RV park space, but this time we are going to talk about mindset and self-love. So I'm really excited about this. I think it's an important topic to talk about, especially with the entrepreneurial mindset, because sometimes we neglect that quite a bit. So today we have amazing guest Brad Chandler, and he has an amazing background in the real estate space. He's a legend. In 2002, he started Express Home Buyers. 20 years later, Express Home Buyers has bought and sold over 4,000 homes across the country and runs primarily without his involvement. In early 2021, he went through a major life transformation and found freedom and happiness through self-love. Brad transitioned from a real estate giant to a mindset coach after discovering wealth didn't equal to happiness. Addressing deep-seated subconscious issues, he unlocked true potential. His profound change inspires a new mission to help others overcome similar mental blocks and build self-worth for a happy and more successful life. Because of this profound shift, he felt obligated to share this path with others and started Brad Chandler Coaching. One of the cool things about this is if you actually go to bradchandler.com, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, is you can take a self-love quiz and figure out where you need to help in your life for self-loving aspect. So without further ado, I want to introduce Brad. Thanks, Brad,
Oh
for coming
man,
on the show.
thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Excited.
Yeah, though. Sorry. You got such an impressive background, right? You're a legend. So I had to make sure I was getting all the key points into your background. And I just, having someone of your magnitude on the show, we do appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about this journey from having, I mean, you still have it, you're just not as involved in it, but having this massive real estate production going to going into more of the mindset and as what you call the self-love aspect.
Yeah. So I know that if I was listening to this podcast 4 or 5 years ago and I heard self-love, I probably already turned it off by now. But I would urge you to just be patient and give it some thought because someone's going to listen to this podcast that is going to take a step that will forever change their life. I know at least one person will. It might be you. So don't discount the self-love thing because I would have it. And by doing the work, my life has changed so profoundly. So to start my story, we got to go all the way back to ninth grade. I read a book on how to buy real estate with no money down, and I knew that real estate was always going to be what I wanted to do, or at least as a kid. And because I could make a lot of money in real estate, that's what this book said. I didn't know why I wanted to make a lot of money. I know now why I do, and we'll hit that in a couple of minutes. So ninth grade read the book. Fast forward to 2002, an investor bought my neighbor's house, and I went and talked to him, and he said, yeah, this is what I do. I buy houses below market, fix them up and resell them. So I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. So I spent 8 long months working a full-time job, coming home. It was rough. It was like every week that went by, I had no money. I had a negative $80,000 net worth. And I was like, if these people can do it, I can do it. So I just kept going and going and going. And I bought my first house in July of 2003, bought 6 houses in July and August, went to my boss in October of 2003 and said, I quit.
Nice.
My wife at the time was like, have you lost your mind? We have a newborn son and I have 2 kids. Like, what are you thinking? I was like, it'll be fine. And here we are 4,000 houses later. And my company, we got 29 houses under contract last month. And I worked an hour a week.
That's amazing. That's everybody's goal and dream, right?
I think so. I mean, so what my business has done is it has allowed me to pursue my true passion and purpose and why I feel like I was put on this earth. And that is to help other people break down these limiting beliefs that some of us know we have and some of us we don't know. And so, yeah, my business allows me to do that every day. And so I wake up every day living my purpose. And it's so wonderful. I for 47 years, I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this real estate thing. And now I know why.
Yeah. So that is interesting that you kind of stepped away from this. What was it that made you decide to get away from the real estate or not be so involved in it on a day-to-day basis to focus on your mindset?
So 3 years ago, I was trying to get my son help for anxiety. At the time, he was 18. He had pretty severe anxiety. And I
Mm.
tried everything, drugs and therapist and psychiatrist, you name it. And so I was on this call, Zoom call with this performance coach, and she says, "Do you know that you have a tick?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "You blink like crazy when you talk about your childhood. You may
Mm.
have unresolved childhood issues that are literally affecting your son's anxiety." I'm like, "No chance. I'm a single dad. I have been for years. I never miss anything with of my sons. I get up with him at night. I mean, we eat dinner every night. Like, no way, but sure, I'll try it. I'll try whatever you've got." So I flew out and over the course of a weekend, really, it was a 3 hour session. My life forever changed. And I came back and I looked around at all the people in my network, my family, my business, my community. I was like, oh my gosh, they're suffering for the same reason that I was suffering. And I just healed in 3 hours what traditional therapy couldn't do in 3 decades. So, wait, could I possibly like help them? And so I just started like talking kind of casually to people, and people are like, "Brad, you're really good at this. Like, I've got more out of this conversation than I've got from my therapist." And I just kept helping and I kept studying. And I just had this immense amount of passion and love for this endeavor I was involved in. And I was like, I can't do real estate anymore. Like, it was never about real estate. It was always about making money
Mhm.
to prove my worth and feel better. And I'm not the only one. There are countless entrepreneurs that start a business thinking, number one, I didn't have much control as a kid, so I'm going to have control. You really don't control anything in life, like but your thoughts. But
Yeah.
me and so many other entrepreneurs, here's how we think. If I can make $5 million, I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be worth something. But here's what I found out. Money can never bring you happiness. Anything outside your health, outside yourself, can never bring you happiness. Everything you ever needed to be happy, you have right now. So here's the trick, guys, is I can show you, or other people can show you, how you can get to that state that you're trying to get to with the $5 million in 5 years or 10 years today, right? And then once you get to that state of peace and harmony and self-love, the chances of you getting to be worth $5 million have just shot up through the roof, because now you're doing it for the right reasons. And the right reasons are to follow your dream, to follow your purpose, and in my case, to make an impact. Once I shifted, guys, 3 years ago, from trying to make money to make myself feel better to making an impact, my net worth has gone up way more than any other 3 year period ever before. Money
Nice.
doesn't bring you happiness. Happiness actually brings you money.
Nice. And I that's very well put. I agree with that too. It's I've always I got into the business. So both Ben and I have been in real estate investing for 20 years, and I got in for more of I wanted my time freedom. That's what I love. I loved traveling. I loved being with my family and my friends. And and money is a byproduct of that, right? If I was happy with what I was doing and being able to do what I wanted to do, it makes me want to work harder or work more within the business. So let me play a little devil's advocate with your response. You had said money can't bring happiness, which I agree with, but there's people that say, well, I rather be unhappy in my Lambo. What's
That's,
your response to that?
I mean, it's just utter silly, utter silliness. Why be unhappy anywhere? Um,
Yeah.
why not just be happy? Why can't you can have your cake and eat it too? Why not figure out in the it was 3 hours that forever changed my life. And now as I work with clients, it's incredible because it's the 3 to 4 hour period where they have these major breakthroughs and major shifts. So if you know someone has a proven process to end your suffering, and it's all the same, guys, whether you're drinking too much, smoking too much weed, you have anxiety, depression, OCD, whatever it is, it's all from one thing and one thing only. It's your flawed thinking. that flawed thinking came from sometime years and years ago where you were going through a stressful time and you made up a meaning about that time that you have lived with now your whole life that's controlling everything. So all you have to do is go back and find that meaning and show your brain that it's untrue. And when your brain understands, it's like a mismatch detector in your brain. Wait, I've been living all these years I've been living that if I'm my true self, love will be taken from me. But oh my gosh, I remember when I talked to Aunt Sally or Uncle Henry and I showed my true self and they didn't take love. Ding, 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 ding. The mismatch detector goes off. And then the negative thing that you have just vanishes because every single thing you have that's negative in your life is your brain. It's a solution to something that it thinks is more painful. But the thing that we think is more painful is nothing more than an untruth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to loop back because you said you originally went to this session because of your son. Can you
Yeah.
talk about what happened shortly after with your son? Like, can you close that loop? Did he get better? Did you implement some of the changes with him?
Yeah. So both my daughter and my son had anxiety. Um, they're children, right? And it's hard to get anyone to change when they don't want to change. So my son no longer has anxiety, and my son used weed and alcohol in a major way to cope with his weed and anxiety. He no longer does that. So while he's not, none of us are ever perfect. He's still, on his journey. They've both made enormous strides.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah,
So,
that's
um, one thing, you also kind of brought up was that, uh, well, it kind of goes back to the money can't bring happiness thing. And, a lot of people out here, when they kind of battle with people that, help with mindset issues and stuff like that. And they say, well, Brad, that's easy for you to say because you've made millions. I don't have anything. I don't have a dime to my name. How can I focus on being happy when I need to focus on providing for my family or for myself? How can I even get past that? How am I supposed to work on myself and being happy?
Yeah. So I've heard that a lot. And I've
Hmm.
walked the yachts and I've said, this doesn't bring you happiness. I get a slew of comments that say, shut up and stop saying this because you've got money. But it's not just me. Look at Michael Jackson, Prince, Matthew Perry. They all had money. They weren't happy. So I would suggest a couple of things. The studies show that once you make about $80,000 and your basic needs are met, it doesn't matter if you make 85,000, 850,000, or 8.5 million. It doesn't change your happiness. So there is some base level of having your needs met that happier. But here's the thing that I think is really critical. There is a chance that that person that says, I don't have a dime, and how can I focus on that? It may be that they don't have a dime because of these underlying limiting beliefs, because their mother or father said, I wish you never were born. You are no good. You're never going to amount to anything. And then they played, I don't even want to say, I'm going to strike that. Then they just live their life thinking, I'm not good enough. And so I'm going to struggle. There's a case study that I read recently where this gentleman was in his 40s and he was a classic underachiever, didn't pay his rent, got fired from job after job. And when they did the deep work, he found out that if he was successful, it would have let his dad off the hook from treating him so poorly. And so he continued to underachieve, thinking that one day his dad would come back and say, you know what? I did really mess you up, and I'm really sorry. And that would connect the relationship. Well, that was an untruth because his dad was likely never going to do that. So when he figured that out, boom, his life started to blossom. He started to date. He got a degree. He started to make more money. So I would ask yourself, what put you in this position in the first place? It could be these underlying limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
yeah. I have another question. After that time where you did have kind of like your epiphany, did your business start to change automatically? Is that the time that were you only working an hour a week at that time, or was it shortly after that you kind of made the changes so you could like focus more on helping others?
Everything in my business changed. No, there was absolute utter chaos in my business from the time I started it till the time that I went through this transformation. I didn't feel enough. So I tried everything in my power. I just did silly, risky stuff. I made 5 business mistakes from 2005 to 2017 that cost my business partner and I $9 million. I look back at every one of those mistakes, and every one of those mistakes were around my ego and trying to prove my worth. So now my company, I don't have chaos. We're on this nice, steady trajectory. I'm not trying to do 100 different things to prove my worth. And so the chaos is gone. The culture is gone. I don't hire people and be like, you got to make more money. You got to make more money. No, let's just focus on making an impact. How can we help more sellers? And so everything has changed.
Nice. Kind of getting back to asking some questions on the real estate, because I know this is a real estate show. What is your main focus in real estate? I know you flip houses, you do wholesaling. What's your main focus?
I mean, for years, for 17 years, it was 100% fix and flip. And then we just figured out that renovations were really hard, especially on a large scale. And
Yeah.
so we wholesale, 50, 60% of the houses now, and then we take down the other houses and do some level of renovation.
Okay. Nice. Are you buying rentals also and doing that?
We have not bought many rentals. We had a pretty big rental portfolio that, again, due to my ego, we had to sell to pay off the mistakes that we made. So no, we just have a couple rental properties now.
Got it. Got it. Thanks. Okay. I want to circle back again on, and this is this is a story. You've probably heard this story, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and your take on it. But so there's 2 sons, and their dad was an alcoholic, right? And one son grows up and basically becomes an alcoholic, drug addict, just does nothing with his life. And the other one becomes a very successful business owner and philanthropist. I can't even talk right now.
Philanthropist.
Yep. Thank you. I always
I
screw that one up. And so he makes a life out of himself, and he has a great family. And so, the interviewer, the news channel says to the drunk son, why is it that you're like this? And he responds, well, my dad was an alcoholic. And the other one that's successful says, well, because my dad was an alcoholic. What's your take on that? And how can that vary so much between brothers? Let's say they were identical twins. How can that change so much?
What an amazing question to start. And I freaking love it. And we could spend like hours on this topic. But here's a couple thoughts. First of all, you've all heard alcoholism and depression runs in families. And I say that's absolute horseshit. Alcoholism doesn't run in families. The associated trauma from alcoholism runs in families. When you are the child of an alcoholic, there has never been an addict that's walked this planet that ever felt enough. When you don't feel enough, there's no way you can ever make your kids feel enough. So the one kid or the one son that becomes the alcoholic, he's just trying to dull his pain from the pain that he lived through. The other, and I know this is kind of like a fairy tale, the other one, you mentioned the word successful. Successful in our ecosphere, community, culture, that's the word I was looking for. How do most people in this United States define success? With money. So yeah, that's great that he went out and he made a bunch of money and he's got a family. But there's no way that kid could have escaped the feeling of not enough. So he may have a lot of money, but his kids may have issues and he may be on the verge of divorce, which I see all the time. So that's my answer. But you're right. Trauma affects people completely different. It's affected my sisters and me completely different.
Yeah. Yep. And that's a hard thing to pinpoint, like what is the thing that is changing. And I guess it comes down to your perspective, like you said. And another way of saying it is, I guess it comes down to your idealism of what you define as success and what's going to make a difference to you, or what affects you differently than others. And that's why no 2 people are the same, right?
Yeah. And to go a little further, look, we're human beings. You get to live whatever life you want to live. You want to be an alcoholic? You can be an alcoholic. You want to be a happy, loving husband and father and financially successful and successful at home? You can do that too. It's more about look at your life and where you are and do you like the results or not? I, at 47 years old, thought that my results were okay. Okay, so what? I smoke weed, for a couple of years every night. So what that I drink? So what that I had two marriages that didn't work out. It was their fault. So what that my kids have anxiety? Like a lot of kids have anxiety. I blew it all off. And that's why I developed the self-love quiz that you mentioned, bradchandler.com/self-love, because just go there. You owe it to your kids at the very least. Go spend 3 minutes of your life to take this 12-question quiz, and you're going to see what are the results in your life. So no matter if you're the alcoholic son or the son who has been, quote, financially successful, just look at your life. Do you have good relationships? Is your health good? Are you pissed off all the time? Are you anxious? Do you work too much? Are you, it's the biggest addiction, the biggest like accepted addiction in the world is working too much. So just look at all those things and ask yourself, do you like it? And if you do, great, keep doing it. But if you don't, there's a reason, and it's not your fault. It's usually from the programming that you received as a child.
Yeah.
So if we don't like it or somebody doesn't like it, what's the next step? Obviously, go to the website, take the self-love quiz. That will give us a little bit better understanding of where we currently stand.
Yeah, and whether you work with someone like myself or not, you've got to get to what are the meanings that you create in your life around these stressful situations that are still driving you now. And then you've got to show and teach your brain through neuroplasticity that this isn't true, and you get to recode your brain. This science that I'm talking about, guys, when I said earlier that every single alcoholism is just a solution to what the brain thinks is more painful. That thing that they think is more painful is always a learned behavior that came as a child when you went through this emotional turmoil, right? So up until 2004, Freud said this, and then 100 years after his death, they said that learned emotional memory was stuck in your brain forever. They just now realize in the last 20 years that that's not true. You can actually massage and take those neurons and replace them with the truth. Well, think about this. If the average therapist or life coach or psychiatrist is like 45 years old, they didn't learn this stuff, right? So you're like, oh, they're probably teaching it now in school. No, they're not teaching it in school. They're doing the same shit they've been doing for the last 100 years. You've got anxiety. Let's teach you some breathing techniques. You've got alcoholism. Let's figure out how you don't drive by the liquor store. That is just treating the conscious level symptoms. That's why therapy and marriage counseling fails for so many people. If you want to solve a physical or mental pain, you've got to go to the source, because no one was born with alcoholism or work addiction or racing mind. Nobody. Anxiety. It was learned. And if it was learned, it can be unlearned.
Yeah.
Can this be applied for multiple people and marriages? Have you worked with couples, and is that something that couples can work on together? Is this something that can be a collaborative experience or process?
100%. And if both people work together, it usually makes it more effective and easier. But I have worked with people where one spouse didn't do it and they did, and they had miraculous results. If you have marriage issues, the issue in your relationship is not the actual relationship. It's the relationship that each of you has with your own individual self. Like, that is why marriage counseling doesn't work. I went to 50 different marriage counseling sessions. Hold her hand more, take her on more date nights, repeat back what she says, be more affectionate. None of that shit works when your subconscious mind is saying, you're not worthy, you're not worthy, you're not worthy. They never once asked, well, let's figure out about your childhood and maybe what are these things that you're carrying from childhood? No, it was always like, let's try to repair the relationship. That wasn't the problem. The problem was my relationship and their relationship with themselves. So
Nice.
if you're going to marriage counseling, it's not working. That's why.
Yeah, that's a important fact, is that it all comes down to you and you growing and changing to love yourself. I mean, like basically this whole podcast that we're talking about and what you're doing.
And you know what, guys? It's the same thing with your children. Do you want to know why your son or daughter has anxiety or is acting out in school or has behavioral problems? Just go grab your spouse, walk into the bathroom, look in the mirror. You're the cause of it. Notice I didn't say it's your fault, but you're the cause of it. And it's not your fault because you have pushed these thoughts down on them that you don't even know you're doing. I did it. I was this amazing, amazing single dad, but yet because I felt inferior, I was pushing my kids in a way that I didn't even understand. Kids only misbehave for one reason and one reason only. They lack connection with a parent. And what do so many parents do? Put them in timeout or hit them? That's the exact opposite of what your child needs. Your child needs your love and attention and understanding, not more
Yes,
disconnection.
I love it. You mentioned earlier that why people get into alcohol, drink and smoke or do drugs is because they're trying to replace a pain, and that's a way to kind of ease it. So with what you are doing in teaching people self-love and changing that mindset, are you basically just finding something else to replace that alcoholism with, or is it more in depth than that?
No, so another great question. You're full of awesome questions, man. So the alcoholism is a coping mechanism to stop from feeling this underlying pain. When you understand that the underlying pain that you're trying to hide from isn't true, your brain is like, whoa, I no longer need the alcohol. So there's nothing to replace it with. Now, I don't know if you asked this question because of this reason, but Alcoholics Anonymous has a failure rate of about 86%. Maybe some people say the success rate's 8%. So maybe the failure is 92%. What often happens is because of the culture and because of the camaraderie and because of the support, people are often able to stop drinking, but they don't fix the underlying problem. So then they do need to replace it with something. So they go to smoking or sugar or whatever it is, smoking pot. And it's called a dry alcoholic, I think. It's like you're alcoholic, you're just not drinking. You're still miserable and sad and hurt. And it doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah, I love it.
You also mentioned that before when you were talking about parenting, that it was like the inferiority that you felt. That was that conscious or subconscious? And was it only when you met with the person that it like came to light?
100% subconscious. Like I didn't wake up and say I'm a schmuck. I would say things to my ex-wife like I'm really dumb, I'm not smart, I go to these masterminds, these guys are making so much more money. But I thought I loved myself. I thought I had high self-esteem. I thought that I didn't care what people thought about me, but it was all a lie. I did. I cared about all of those things. So it was my subconscious, with my son in particular. He told me in that weekend excursion that I took that forever changed my life. He said, Dad, I only thought you would love me if I played golf at a high level. And despite me telling him, you don't even need to play for me, that was my conscious person, my conscious mind. But my subconscious mind was likely thinking, if my son can make the PGA Tour, I'm going to be worthy. And so I unknowingly put a ton of pressure on him.
Yeah, it makes sense that it's subconscious more frequently than conscious.
Yeah, 83% of Americans identify as not being, quote, very happy. If you're not very happy, if you have extreme self-love, you're very happy. I am very happy now. If you lack self-love, you're not very happy. If you're not very happy, you cannot not be affecting your kids. Again, this isn't a blame game like what you're a schmuck parent. No, you're doing the absolute best that you can, just like my father and just like my mother did. But that doesn't mean that you're not affecting your child. So again, if your child has behavioral issues or anxiety or depression and you want to solve it, you've got to look to yourself first. That's the best thing that you can do. Or you want to fix your marriage, fix yourself. It's not fixed. There's nothing broken. You need to heal yourself.
Have you worked with people that are bipolar?
I have worked with people who have been diagnosed with bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
There's a famous book, Trauma and Recovery, by a famous Harvard psychologist, and she says that there's only one true psychiatric diagnosis, and that's complex post-traumatic stress syndrome, aka trauma as a child. So you can label yourself with bipolar, depression, anxiety, OCD, a borderline personality disorder. For kids like behavioral blah blah disorder. But here's the thing, there's no disorder. Your brain's doing exactly what it should be doing. All of those things that we just mentioned, replace that with the alcoholism we were talking about earlier. It's just you trying to run from a painful memory. No one was born with bipolar, despite what they said. Depression, they're like, there's something wrong with your brain. You've got serotonin levels that are messed up. You cannot, till this day, with all the technology, you cannot test for serotonin levels. It's all bullshit made up around. This is what Western medicine loves to do. They love to diagnose, label, and then give you a drug. 33% of Americans today are on an anti-anxiety or antidepressant drug. But look at hospitalizations for anxiety and depression. They're going up. Does that mean the drugs work? Hell no, the drugs don't work. 70% of Americans are on a prescription drug. The numbers tell the truth, right?
Yep. With, with part of your plan to get into self-love, does that include any kind of like dietary changes? Are you suggesting different minerals, vitamins, anything of that sort that helps out with the process?
So I'm a health and longevity nut. I have not gotten to the point in my program where we're like screening people for those things. I know that food and exercise has an impact on your mental health, as does sleep. And it's very important. It's an important part of my life. But I have not needed with any of my clients to change the diet. What happens though, there's a client who's lost 25 pounds. He stopped drinking. He's like, I no longer need to drink to feel better. And now he's way healthier than he was when he started the program just by, stopping drinking.
So it kind of just naturally happens. I mean, I get that you start realizing what the stuff that you're putting into your body is hurting yourself. So the opposite of self-love, right? You can't go and eat fast food every single day because eventually that's going to catch up to you.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I get that.
Yes. So think about the obesity rate in the country right now. It's insane, right? People eat that are obese aren't fat and lazy. They are doing the same thing. They're eating to protect themselves from this feeling. So we all have known people who have dropped 60 pounds, and then 6 months later they put back on 80 pounds. It's because they never figured out. It's just like the dry alcoholic we talked about. They never figured out what caused them to put weight on in the first place. There was a study called the ACE studies, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it basically, from 0 means you had no issues in your childhood, to 10 being like you experienced all 10. And there's a correlation. The higher the number, the more heart disease, the more just divorce, a drug addiction. It goes on and on and on. But do you know why that study was formed? Because there was a weight loss doctor in California that was having amazing success with women, but they were dropping out. So he went and interviewed them. And they were like, if I lose weight, the people who sexually assaulted me, it might happen again. It was their way of protecting themselves from something again that wasn't even true. True in the sense that the threat didn't exist. So yeah, food's another like huge thing. As a child, you could, when you were stressed, could you get in the car and go have a beer at the bar? No, but what could every American typically do? They could go to their refrigerator cabinet and get food to feel better about whatever stress they were going through.
Yeah, and I admit I do that every once in a while, right? If it's a super stressful day, and I'll just like, oh, you know what? I'm just gonna have some ice cream. Screw it. I'm just gonna have it. It does make me feel better, or I think it makes me feel better.
Temporarily.
Temporarily, exactly. Until I realize, oh crap, now I gotta work out a little bit harder next week or tomorrow to work that one out. But so kind of something you mentioned in the beginning is you can't control what happens throughout your day. There's going to be stress factors. There's going to be things that happen. And going back to kind of what we're just talking about now, normally I can handle stress okay. But like I said, every once in a while, it'll just be a crazy day. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go eat some ice cream, or I'm going to go make an old fashioned. And what would you be your response to that? Like, if it's not happening all the time, but you do it, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I would say everything in moderation. If you eat well and don't drink 80% of the time, then an occasional drink or ice cream is not going to kill you. If you're doing it though to cope, I would say, I'd rather have you eat the ice cream or have the drink just because you like want the taste of it, rather than trying to use it as a coping mechanism, because those things will never ever help in the long run. It's just like taking the medication. They're just short fixes that typically make us I don't know. I occasionally eat an ice cream, and there's not many times I finish the ice cream. And I'm like, I'm so proud of myself for eating that ice cream. I'm like, oh, I do that. I don't beat
Yeah.
myself up anymore. But I used to get high and eat like a pint of Ben and Jerry's, and now I don't get high anymore, so I don't even eat a pint of Ben and Jerry's. But I'm way more compassionate on myself when I do make those mistakes. So it doesn't. If you think negative self-talk helps you, it doesn't. Your mind doesn't know the difference between a stranger like lighting you up and saying stuff negative or you. Your brain still releases cortisol because it feels the stress, and cortisol is terribly damaging. It's an inflammatory, and most
Hmm.
caused by inflammation.
Yeah.
Another topic that I know Dustin and I have talked about a lot, and we do think there is a definite negative effect, is short form media, reels and like the TikToks and just these 10-second, 15-second clips. And we even said we find ourselves going through it and we can notice a difference in just like attention span.
Sleep
Can we get your
patterns.
opinion on like what effects it has and from your standpoint and how bad it potentially is or not?
It's not good. They being the technology folks have figured out how to hook people, and it's a dopamine rush. Like seeing
Hmm.
things that look good and porn and all that stuff gives you a dopamine, and your brain loves dopamine. It's like the feel good, right? So yeah, it's a really scary world in terms of the number of kids now that have, and shit, adults too, that are like strapped and addicted to their phone. So I've dealt with people who that was their addiction. It was either porn or it was going to their phone constantly because it gave them that relief. They felt bad, and then we're going to go distract it. I'm going to go eat a pint of Ben and Jerry's. The other guy's going to go distract by going through these reels. So it's not great. Again, moderation. You look at them for 2 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day. Not the end of the world. If you're scrolling for hours at a time, it's a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually two questions, but I'll start with the first one. Is is in your opinion the hardest one to kind of move away from to get to a self-love space? Is it, is it harder to move from drugs and alcohol? Is it harder to move from like sex addiction? Is it harder to move from food, over eating? What's your heart, like the coping mechanism stuff that people do when they're not happy with?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I know just from all of my work and my studies that food is a really tough one because everywhere you go, there's food.
Mhm.
Alcohol, I mean, you can keep away from alcohol, you can turn your phone off, but you got to eat and there's food everywhere. So that's definitely a tough one. Um, it's all the same thing though, guys. This is what I keep saying. It's all of that running from something. And once you figure that thing out, there's nothing, whether it's sexual abuse or rape or incest or whatever it was as a child, like everything can be overcome if it's processed and done the right way.
Got it. And so my other question, this is kind of it goes into a little bit more personal because this is something I've kind of struggled with a little bit. Um, you know, I've made good money over the years, right? And I've been happy with that, even though I know I have the potential to make more. But I always, like I said, I got into this business and real estate and entrepreneurship basically for the time freedom, and I love that. And being, that of course comes with bringing in money, but the potential of making more to help out others is something I struggle with. Whereas, like, well, should I put in a lot more hours, or should I start this other business because it's going to make a lot more money, but it's going to take a lot more of my time, but I'm be able to help, more friends and family, and, and donate a lot more. But it's not going to make me that happy, but it will make other people happy and help out their lives. What's kind of your thought process on that?
Another good question. There's no right answer to that. This is where you're a human being and you get to decide. What I would ask you though is to make sure that you're not thinking about working more for the sake of proving something, and that you're consciously saying, "Hey, I'm going to do it for other people," when your unconscious mind is saying, "Well, really, you're not enough, and you better go make a couple more $1 million to prove your worth." So I would study that and contemplate that and meditate on that, pray on that, whatever you do. But no right answer. I mean, if you want to start another company that, you know, start a to fund a charity, I mean, it's up to you.
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like don't rely, because this is one of the things I think is like, well, don't rely on what people, if they're going to be happy because of you providing them. I don't know. I've
No,
struggled with that for the last couple of years. Like, oh man, I should have really pushed myself more to help out more, I guess.
yeah, and that's where I would ask you to look a lot of I'm not enough, so I've got to do more. I've got to help more people.
Yeah.
And you're not obligated to help anybody. If you really want to help other people, you help yourself first. You've got to give from the full cup, because if you give from a full cup, you'll be able to give more.
Yeah. Well said.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe your daily routines and what your thoughts are and the importance of having maybe a morning routine or just being consistent with different things in your life and what your kind of day looks like these days?
Yeah, wake up about 6:30, 6:45 to a meditation. Welcome to your day. It's a really powerful, like uplifting meditation starting the day. I drop my daughter off at the bus and go directly to the gym 5 days a week and sometimes on the weekends as well. And I do weights. I then do like the foam roller. I go into the sauna and then into the steam room and then into a cold shower, come home, work for a couple hours, and I have this tool called the Joy Regenerator. So anytime that I'm in, your listeners can go grab that if they want to, completely free at bradchandler.com/joy. But it's a way to process your emotions. So anytime I feel a negative emotion, I can in nanoseconds process it and say, okay, I feel sad because I'm feeling not enough. And that's from my childhood and the way that my dad made me feel. So I don't often feel triggered, you know, a couple of times a month. And then at night, I usually go to sleep. I read something on the brain or neuroscience. And what else do I do? I meditate. I try to meditate like almost every night. I listen to music.
Nice.
And
I'm guessing
when I eat well, and like I said, I have an occasional drink, very occasional.
nice. I'm guessing you read Cybernetics by what's his name?
Yeah,
Back-
psycho cybernetics. Yep.
Yeah, Psycho Seven. Yeah. That was I read that a couple of years ago. It was definitely, the studies in there are eye-opening to how people process and think about themselves. It's
Yeah, I touched on work addiction, and this is something I like to share. A lot of people are like, my marriage is failing because my husband or my wife works too much. Your marriage isn't failing because they work too much. Your marriage is failing because of the way that your spouse feels about themselves that is driving them to work so much. It's similar to alcoholism, where you say drinking isn't the problem. The problem is how you feel about yourself. And how you feel about yourself, again, goes back to that underlying thing that you're running from that isn't even true.
yeah. Yeah. So I want to ask some questions about your, self-love quiz, and how did that come about? How did you figure out the points to basically grade someone on that quiz? What made you think about putting something like that together?
I thought about me. I thought about, oh my gosh, for 47 years, I thought I had self-love and a high self-image, and I didn't. So how could other people in my situation, as I'm spreading this word and doing the work, how could I show other people that they may not have self-love as well? So I went through my life, and then I went through some, I spent, I don't know, a couple months going through books, and just I'd find something and they'd be like, well, this is a sign of childhood, whatever. And I would just put it in there. And it's worked. It seems to have worked really great. People are like, do you just set it up so everyone has lack of self-love? Of course not. Like, you can go take it and score, you can score extreme self-love. We have about, unfortunately, probably about 7% of the people that take the test score extreme self-love, which is, I just put this together now. 83% of Americans identify as not being very happy. So that's not too far off. So that's interesting.
Wow, nice. And you mentioned something about, it was, you go to bradchandler.com/joy. And what was that again?
That was a joy regenerator. So you'll get a whole instruction and a sheet that you can actually track this stuff on, and it will completely change the way that you deal with your emotions. And if you ever argue with your spouse, like, it's an amazing tool to to like kind of quell arguments. And conflict in relationships can and should actually bring you closer when you're in the right space. I know for most of my life, conflict was bad. It would end up in like 3 days of battle. But now with my partner, when she brings me something, it always ends up, whether it's a day later or 2 days later, whatever, ending up with us becoming closer. Because anytime you feel a negative emotion, it has nothing to do with the actual situation. Again, you're in fight or flight. So your brain goes back to a time when you felt something similar, because it's like danger, 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 and you're bringing that in. So when you argue with your wife about something, it never has to do with the actual argument. It has to do with you each bringing in your particular meanings from events in the past.
Nice. Very cool.
Did you read before that epiphany happened? Were you ever into self-help genre or books? Was that ever something that you liked or enjoyed before that
Ben,
time?
Ben, I spent most of my life in self-help books. And here's the analogy that I use. I felt like I had a bungee cord strapped to my back, and I was sprinting for, from 20 years old to 47. For 27 years, I was sprinting on this self-development journey. But it wasn't until that 3-hour session where I took a machete and cut the bungee and I just took off. I can't tell you how many clients. I just had one today that was like, Brad, I've done so much self-help and I've gone to Tony Robbins and Zig Ziglar. I knew exactly what I should have been doing, but I couldn't do it until I met you, because no one went deep enough and figured out what are those underlying meanings that are untrue. And so that's what I did. And that's when my life took off. And that's when my life changed so profoundly. And yours can too. Like if you're listening to this and you're suffering or struggling, you got a bad marriage, kids with behavioral problems, you drink too much, you're overweight. None of this is your fault. And literally in a matter of hours, if you're ready and you believe it and you're willing to do the work, things can change profoundly in ways that you probably can't even imagine.
And the
Nice.
easiest way for if somebody wanted to take that first step is to go to your website and then take the self-love quiz, correct? That would be the step.
That's a great first step. If you like this type of content, I have a podcast called How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs. So you can check that out too, learn a lot more about us in the process. And I have some amazing guests on there.
Yeah, I'm glad you just brought that up, because I was going to bring that up. You have a amazing podcast, and I've heard you on some other podcasts of other people have listened to, and you have a great program and a great show to listen to. So I appreciate you coming on our show and sharing this. Like I said, we haven't had someone like this or talk even about this on the show before, and I do believe it's important to focus on, and it will help out in the long run for sure. So I know we're approaching here almost an hour, 45 minutes or so. And we talked about this. A lot of people know your name from the real estate world, at least in our world, being in real estate this long, everybody knows your name. What would you say for someone that's just getting into this real estate world, and you hear, especially if they're on, the Reels or Instagram or TikTok, and it's all about better grind, 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 and they don't talk anything about, working on yourself, mindset, because that's a huge issue I see. I actually do some coaching in the real estate side, and that's a lot of stuff I see is people are just have some mindset issues and they can't get past that. So what would you say to get started in that, but also focus on yourself? What were the key steps there?
Yeah, because you can take the best training program in the world, but if your subconscious mind is telling you that you don't deserve financial success because the way your parents made you feel or they told you were no good, it's going to be really freaking hard to get that success. So I would just, everything we talked about today, just commit to doing the work. If you're thinking about getting in real estate, are you getting in real estate to try to make a bunch of money just like I did because you think money will bring you happiness? Well, I never had a passion around real estate. My passion was around trying to make myself feel whole, right? And worthy. So many people don't know their purpose. And then once they do this work, they begin to see what their purpose is. So I would say just you owe it to yourself to do the work. One of the sessions we as part of the program, we have a weekly mastermind. And a couple months ago, we did a segment where we put the audience or the clients into like a quick hypnosis, and then we had them go back to like 6 or 7 or 8 years old and said, what was it you really loved to do as a kid? Because a lot of times that's what you really love to do now. It hasn't changed. So try to figure out what your purpose is, because when you can find your purpose in life, oh my gosh, it is such a big part of happiness. Guys, I wake up every day. For those of you who are watching on video, I've got tons of books behind me. I could go sit on a beach with a nice big cooler of water and an umbrella, and literally 8 hours a day for the next 15 years, I could read books on trauma and neuroscience and the brain, and never ever get bored. Think about that. Like, the job that you're in right now, could you go read books for 8 hours a day? Most people would say, hell no, like I want to get away from it. I did this because my mom wanted me to do it. My life partner spent 25 years in corporate America in a job she didn't really like because she thought that's what her mom wanted. So do yourself a favor and go figure out your passion and purpose. And how do you do that? Well, you got to chase the proverbial lion that's chasing you. And if you have limiting beliefs in your subconscious mind, you've got the proverbial lion chasing, which means you're in a fight or flight state. How can you ever figure out your purpose? How can you ever think creatively about the next steps in your business? You can't. So another byproduct when people do the work is they make way more money, because brain calms down. They can actually think and process what are the next smart moves to make.
Nice. So everybody who's listening and watching this, I appreciate that coming on the show and listening to Brad. Said his website's bradchandler.com. We'll put that in the show notes. I highly recommend doing that. Like I said, actually, I don't know if it was on the recording, but I did take the self-love quiz. And so I'm going to review that and reach out, and I look forward to talking with you more about that. And before, we close out here, is there any last things you would like to say to the listeners and help them out?
Yeah, I'm going to say that you're a miracle. Think about that one sperm matching up with that one egg. You were a miracle despite what anyone's ever told you. And you were put here on this earth for a massive mission. And I promise you that massive mission wasn't going to go to a job that you'd hate and suffer and drink too much, eat too much, have anxiety, depression. No, you were meant to live a thriving, successful life, successful not just financially, but with relationships, with health. And you deserve a deeply connected relationship. And if you don't have those things, it's not your fault. It's just your body and mind trying to protect you. That's all we ever do. We try to move from pain to pleasure. That's all we're doing all the time. That's what our subconscious minds is, just to keep you safe. That's the point of it. So if you're suffering, if you're struggling, give up the story that you deserve it. Give up the story that there's not a better way. Give up the story that, well, I've tried all this stuff. You haven't tried it all. You haven't tried it all until you go through this process that I talked about. So I would encourage you to just take the first step. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your kids. And again, life can change so profoundly that you may not even be able to imagine it.
Nice. Well, thank you so much again for being on the show. I know the listeners are going to get tons of motivation to work on themselves, reach out to you, and really appreciate you coming in here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.